common hippopotamus, the most dangerous large mammal in Africa. Not the lion, not the elephant, the hippo. A 3-ton tank with teeth like daggers and a temper that makes crocodiles back away. They grow massive, weighing anywhere from 1,500 to 3,200 kilograms, basically the weight of a pickup truck with a full load. And despite that bulk, they can sprint at 30 miles per hour on land, faster than most people realize until it's charging straight at them. Their bite force hits around 1,800 psi, strong enough to snap a crocodile in half or crush a watermelon like it's made of foam. But here's the thing. Hippos are herbivores. They're not hunting anyone. Every night, they walk onto land and spend hours grazing, consuming about 40 kilograms of grass to fuel those enormous bodies. During the day, they stay submerged in rivers and lakes for up to 16 hours, sometimes holding their breath for 5 minutes at a time while walking along the bottom like underwater bulldozers. Their skin secretes a reddish, oily substance that people used to think was blood sweat, but it's actually a natural sunscreen, an antibiotic that protects them from infections and UV damage. Males are intensely territorial, controlling stretches of river and defending them with 50-centimeter tusks that can inflict devastating wounds during fights. These battles are brutal, leaving scars across their backs and sides, proof of decades spent defending territory. The real danger comes from their unpredictability. Hippos kill an estimated 500 people every year in Africa, more than lions, leopards, and crocodiles combined. Most attacks happen when someone accidentally gets between a hippo and the water, or too close to a mother with a calf, or simply in the wrong place when a male decides his territory has been violated. They don't roar warnings like big cats. They charge in silence, closing the distance before you realize what's happening. Habitat loss makes things worse as rivers shrink and human settlements expand into traditional hippo territory. They're also killed for their ivory tusks, which are actually enlarged canine teeth that fetch high prices on illegal markets. Climate change is drying up water sources, forcing hippos into smaller areas where conflicts with humans become inevitable. The hippo rewrote the rules. It looks slow and peaceful during the day, submerged like floating barrels with just eyes and ears above water. But when the sun sets, 3 tons of pure aggression walks onto land. They're not hunting you. They're not even carnivores. But get between a hippo and water, or near a calf, or in their territory by accident, and you'll discover why Africa fears them more than predators. The hippo doesn't need to announce itself. Respect in the wild isn't given to the loudest. It's given to the one that doesn't need to prove anything. Pygmy hippopotamus. The common hippo's shy forest cousin. Smaller, gentler, and rarer than a panda. If the river hippo is a battle tank, the pygmy is a forest ghost. They weigh only 180 to 275 kilograms, about 1/10 the size of their massive relatives, roughly the weight of a large motorcycle. Standing just 75 to 100 centimeters at the shoulder, they look more like oversized pigs than the barrel-shaped giants people associate with the word hippo, and their personality is completely different too. Pygmy hippos are solitary and nocturnal, slipping through West African rainforests in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Ivory Coast without making a sound. They spend far more time on land than in water, a reversal of the common hippo's lifestyle. Their feet are webbed, but they use them to navigate muddy forest floors rather than swim for hours. They have rounded heads instead of the flattened, broad skulls of river hippos, and their eyes sit lower on their faces because they don't need periscope vision to watch for threats while submerged. Pygmy hippos form monogamous pairs instead of violent harems, and they give birth to single calves on land rather than in the water. When threatened, they don't charge like their aggressive cousins. They flee, disappearing into thick vegetation where their dark skin and compact size make them nearly invisible. Only about 2,000 to 3,000 pygmy hippos remain in the wild, and their numbers keep dropping. Rainforest destruction is happening at catastrophic rates across West Africa, eliminating the dense cover these animals depend on. Civil wars disrupted conservation efforts for decades, leaving populations unprotected during critical years. They're hunted for bushmeat despite protected status, and their small population size creates genetic vulnerability that could lead to collapse even if habitat improves. Scientists struggle to count them accurately because they're so elusive. Camera traps catch glimpses, a shadow at dusk, prints in the mud, but getting a true population estimate is nearly impossible. Climate change is altering forest humidity and seasonal flooding patterns that pygmy hippos rely on. The pygmy hippo survived by doing the opposite of everything that made hippos famous. Instead of dominating rivers with aggression, it disappeared into the forest. Instead of forming violent territorial groups, it lives alone or in quiet pairs. Instead of being impossible to miss, it became almost impossible to find. For decades, scientists thought it might be extinct. Then camera traps caught proof that evolution doesn't always favor size and strength. Sometimes it favors the ones who learned to vanish. In the rainforest, survival belongs to the invisible. West African hippo population. The West African hippo isn't a different species. It's the same river giant, but living in a war zone, where rivers become battlefields and every water source is contested by humans and hippos alike. These populations stretch across Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, and Chad, regions where water is life and conflict is constant. They're slightly smaller on average than their East African relatives, an adaptive response to harsher, more variable conditions. Some live along desert-edge rivers in places where most people wouldn't expect hippos to survive at all. They've learned to tolerate seasonal water changes that would stress other populations, spending dry months in shrinking pools before rains return. Their populations are fragmented, isolated groups separated by hundreds of kilometers of land they can't cross, meaning no genetic exchange and no reinforcements if a local population crashes. They share shrinking water sources with livestock, fishermen, and farmers, leading to higher rates of human conflict than anywhere else in Africa. To avoid these encounters, West African hippos have become more nocturnal than their eastern cousins, adjusting their behavior to slip around human activity. Population estimates put them at only 7,000 to 10,000 individuals, a dramatic decline from historical numbers. The Sahel region is experiencing severe desertification. Rivers are disappearing entirely in some areas, and hippos have nowhere to retreat. Political instability disrupts conservation work, making long-term protection nearly impossible. There are no protected migration corridors, so populations stay trapped in shrinking territories. Dam construction fragments rivers, cutting off traditional movement routes and isolating groups that once mixed freely. Fishing communities compete directly for river access, and poaching for ivory teeth goes unpunished in conflict zones where law enforcement has collapsed. Some populations have been genetically isolated for decades, with no contact with other groups, raising the risk of inbreeding and collapse. These hippos didn't just survive in harsher conditions, they adapted. Smaller bodies need less food. More nocturnal behavior avoids human conflict. Tolerance for seasonal water, changes that would stress other populations. The West African hippo proves that even an animal famous for aggression knows when to compromise. They're not thriving. Populations crash every year, but they're holding on in places where most wildlife has already disappeared. A testament to how far an animal will go to keep its place in a changing world. Adaptation isn't optional. It's the price of survival. East African hippo population. East Africa's hippos are the celebrities. Larger, more aggressive, living in the famous rivers where safari tourists watch them yawn and wonder why Africa's deadliest herbivore looks so calm. These populations stretch across Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique, regions with better water availability and more stable ecosystems. They're the largest hippos on Earth by average body size, with some males pushing the upper limits of the species. Rivers here can hold incredibly high densities. Some stretches support 40 or more hippos per kilometer, creating intense competition and frequent territorial battles. They live in stable, large pods of 10 to 30 individuals, hierarchies maintained through displays of dominance and occasional violent clashes. The famous populations, Serengeti herds, Okavango Delta groups, Mara river pods, are the ones that appear in nature documentaries and wildlife photography. Tourism has habituated some groups, making them more visible and less fearful of boats and vehicles, though this brings its own problems. Population estimates put East African hippos at around 115,000 to 130,000 individuals, the healthiest numbers anywhere on the continent. Some populations migrate with seasonal floods, traveling hundreds of kilometers to follow water and grazing, a behavior rarely seen in West African populations that lack the space and corridors to move. They coexist with massive Nile crocodiles in complex territorial arrangements, where both species maintain uneasy respect. Tourism pressure is increasing, though, boats disturbing pods during critical rest periods, causing stress especially for mothers with calves. Trophy hunting remains legal in some countries, removing large males from breeding populations. River pollution from upstream agriculture introduces chemicals and waste that affect water quality. Anthrax outbreaks during severe droughts have killed hundreds of hippos in single events. Electrified fences meant to protect farmland sometimes trap hippos away from water, leading to deaths. Culling programs remain controversial, but ongoing in areas where human-hippo conflict reaches crisis levels. Climate change is creating unpredictable flood patterns, disrupting the seasonal rhythms hippos have relied on for thousands of years. Increased boat traffic fragments river territories, forcing hippos into smaller, more contested spaces. The East African hippo is what most people picture when they think hippo. The massive jaws opening wide, the bulk barely fitting in the river, the explosive charges that send tourists scrambling. These populations have the space, the water, and the numbers to behave exactly how evolution designed them. No compromises, no shrinking bodies, pure, unapologetic dominance. But even here, in Africa's most protected reserves, the future isn't guaranteed. The rivers that sustain them for millions of years are changing faster than hippos can adapt. Even giants need more than strength to survive the future. Hippopotamus gorgops, a hippo that made modern hippos look small. Eyes perched so high on its skull it could see above the water, while its entire body stayed hidden below. A predator's nightmare. This extinct giant lived from about 2.5 million years ago until roughly 500,000 years ago during the Pleistocene, a time when Africa was wetter, greener, and filled with megafauna that would seem impossible today. Hippopotamus gorgops weighed an estimated 3,900 to 4,500 kilograms, nearly double the size of the largest modern hippos, basically the weight of a full-sized elephant. It stood about 2 meters at the shoulder, towering over anything that approached the water's edge. The most striking feature was its eye sockets, positioned extremely high on the skull in a way that looks alien when you see fossil reconstructions. This adaptation allowed it to remain almost completely submerged while maintaining perfect vision above the waterline, a living submarine with periscope eyes. It lived across East and North Africa, with fossils discovered in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Chad, and Algeria, regions that were once dominated by vast lakes and river systems. It coexisted with saber-toothed cats, giant crocodiles that grew longer than modern ones, and early hominids who probably learned quickly to avoid the water when gorgops was present. Skull structure suggests an even more powerful bite than modern hippos, with jaw mechanics built for crushing and tearing vegetation, or defending against the massive predators of its time. It was likely even more aquatic than today's hippos, spending nearly all its time in water except for nighttime grazing. Then the climate shifted. Over hundreds of thousands of years, Africa transformed from a wet continent with sprawling wetlands into the drier landscape we recognize today, lakes shrank, rivers dried, and the massive water systems that sustained Gorgops disappeared. Its enormous body size, once an advantage for dominance and heat regulation, became a fatal disadvantage. It needed more food, more water, more territory than the changing environment could provide. The megafaunal extinction event that swept through Africa eliminated many large species, and Gorgops was among them. Early humans may have hunted them, though evidence remains unclear and debated among scientists. Competition with the emerging modern hippo species, smaller and more adaptable, might have pushed Gorgops out of shrinking habitats. Hippopotamus gorgops represents what hippos once were before the world forced them to compromise. Bigger, more aquatic, built for a wetter Africa that no longer exists. Its eyes sat so high, it looked alien, a design that solved the problem of staying hidden while remaining aware. For 2 million years, it was the undisputed king of African rivers. Then the climate shifted. The rains failed, the lakes dried, and size, which had been its greatest advantage, became its death sentence. The fossil record shows it didn't shrink or adapt. It simply disappeared. Evolution rewards adaptation, not perfection. The biggest isn't always the survivor. Hippopotamus madagascariensis, Madagascar's hippo, an island that never should have had hippos in the first place. Yet for thousands of years, 3 species of hippos lived there, thriving in isolation until humans arrived. This species survived until approximately 1,000 years ago, a recent extinction in evolutionary terms, meaning it lived alongside early human settlers who witnessed these animals before they vanished forever. It was larger than the pygmy hippo, but smaller than the common hippo, weighing an estimated 400 to 600 kilograms, about the size of a large horse. The species descended from hippos that somehow crossed 400 kilometers of open ocean from mainland Africa, one of the most baffling dispersal events in mammal history. Scientists still debate how they managed it, whether they swam the entire distance, floated on vegetation mats during storms, or island hopped when sea levels were lower and more stepping stones existed. Fossils have been found across Madagascar's highlands and coasts, showing these hippos spread throughout the island and adapted to diverse environments. They coexisted with giant lemurs the size of gorillas, elephant birds that stood 3 meters tall, and crocodiles that grew larger than their mainland relatives. They were likely less aquatic than mainland hippos, simply because Madagascar has fewer large rivers and more seasonal water sources. Their bones show adaptations for a more terrestrial lifestyle, stronger legs relative to body size, suggesting they spent more time on land navigating forests and highlands. The species went extinct shortly after human colonization, probably within 500 to 1,000 years of people arriving on the island. Hunting pressure was immediate and devastating because these hippos had no evolutionary experience with human predation. Habitat burning for slash-and-burn agriculture destroyed forests and changed water availability. Competition for shrinking water sources during dry seasons put hippos in direct conflict with human settlements. As an island population, they were genetically isolated, with no chance of reinforcement from mainland populations if numbers dropped. Climate shifts coincided with human impacts, creating a double pressure that island species rarely survive. Archaeological sites contain hippo bones with cut marks, clear evidence of butchering, and some bones show burning, suggesting humans not only hunted them, but used fire to drive them from hiding places. The Madagascar hippo is proof that even the most impossible journeys can succeed. Somehow, millions of years ago, hippos crossed open ocean and colonized one of the world's most isolated islands. They adapted to forests and highlands, places mainland hippos never conquered. They survived without natural predators, without competition, evolving into something unique. Then humans arrived with fire and spears, and within centuries, they were gone. The last hippo Madagascar will ever know died 1,000 years ago, leaving only bones and caves to prove it ever existed. Isolation protects until the day it doesn't. Hippopotamus lemurle. Madagascar's dwarf hippo. The smallest hippo species ever discovered. Smaller even than today's pygmy hippo. Island life made giants shrink. This species lived until approximately 1,000 years ago, going extinct at the same time as the larger hippopotamus madagascariensis and the rest of Madagascar's megafauna. It weighed only 150 to 250 kilograms, similar to a large pig or small cow, and stood just 60 to 70 centimeters at the shoulder. Island dwarfism drove this dramatic size reduction, an evolutionary response to limited resources where smaller bodies need less food and can survive on what larger animals would starve on. Fossils have been found primarily in Madagascar's southern regions, drier areas with less water availability than the north. The species was likely more terrestrial than aquatic, spending most of its time on land like the modern pygmy hippo rather than lounging in rivers all day. Its teeth and jaw structure show adaptations for a different diet than its larger relatives, possibly more browsing on shrubs and less grazing on grass. The legs were shorter relative to body size than other hippos, giving it a compact, low-slung appearance that would have helped it navigate dense undergrowth. It probably avoided large rivers where the bigger hippo species dominated, instead claiming smaller streams, forest pools, and seasonal wetlands. Human hunting was likely even more intense for this species because its smaller size made it an easier target than the larger hippos. Cut marks on fossil bones from archaeological sites prove humans butchered these animals regularly. Habitat loss from slash-and-burn agriculture eliminated the forests and wetlands where dwarf hippos lived. Introduced species like dogs and pigs may have competed for food or even predated on young hippos. Limited genetic diversity from a small founding population meant the species had less resilience against disease, climate shifts, or population crashes. Climate aridification reduced forest coverage across southern Madagascar, exactly where this species was most common. No refuge populations existed on other islands. The entire species was confined to Madagascar, with nowhere to retreat when conditions deteriorated. Evolution doesn't follow rules. On islands, it does whatever works. The dwarf hippo proves that when resources are limited, smaller is smarter. It needed less food, less water, less territory. While mainland hippos battled crocodiles and predators, the dwarf hippo lived in forests where aggression was pointless. It represented a completely different evolutionary path, one that might have continued for millions of years if humans hadn't arrived. Instead, it became another ghost. Another example of how quickly adaptation means nothing when the environment changes faster than evolution can respond. Success is temporary. All adaptations have expiration dates. Hexaprotodon libriensis hislopi, the Nigerian pygmy hippo, a variant so rare that scientists debate whether it still exists or if the last one died decades ago without anyone noticing. This subspecies or distinct variant of the pygmy hippo was found only in Nigeria's Niger Delta region, one of the most ecologically devastated areas in Africa. It's slightly smaller than the Liberian pygmy hippos, weighing an estimated 160 to 240 kilograms, with a more elongated skull shape and darker skin pigmentation that set it apart from other pygmy hippo populations. The last confirmed sighting happened sometime in the 1960s or 1980s. Records are unclear and conflicting, and no verified observation has occurred since despite targeted searches. Camera trap surveys conducted between 2005 and 2012 failed to detect a single individual, though the surveys were limited in scope due to security concerns and habitat accessibility. If any survive, the population is almost certainly fewer than 100 individuals, possibly fewer than 20, numbers so low that functional extinction may have already occurred, even if a handful still live. The Niger Delta has been utterly transformed by oil extraction. Decades of drilling, pipeline construction, And oil spills have destroyed vast stretches of forest that once provided perfect habitat for pygmy hippos. Civil conflict prevented conservation work for years, leaving the region effectively lawless during critical periods when protection might have saved remnant populations. Bushmeat hunting continues unchecked in areas where enforcement is impossible, and pygmy hippos, though rare, are valuable targets. Pollution from oil spills has contaminated rivers and streams, making even intact forest patches toxic for animals that depend on clean water. Local communities report no sightings in more than 20 years, and hunters who once knew where to find them say they simply stopped seeing tracks and hearing their calls. Climate change is increasing dry season length in the region, stressing forests and reducing water availability in streams where hippos might hide. No protected reserves exist within the historical range of this variant, meaning even if individuals survive, they have no safe habitat. Some conservationists still hope, searching for prints in the mud, interviewing elders about recent stories, analyzing blurry photographs that might show something. But hope without evidence is just another word for extinction we haven't accepted yet. The Nigerian pygmy hippo might be the rarest hippo variant on Earth, or it might already be gone. No one knows. It lived in one of the most ecologically devastated regions in Africa, where oil money destroyed forests faster than anyone could map what lived there. By the time scientists realized this population was unique, it had already vanished into the smoke of burning forests and civil war. Some species disappear before we even knew they needed saving. If you want to see more species explained, click video on screen now and subscribe.